point, and I can sort of go into a bit more detail there, and then, as I say, get on to tasting a few wines or having a chat about a few wines.
Okay.
Yeah. There's somewhere down on the right-hand side here.
You should be good, Ed.
Okay,
Yeah,
let me see here. Okay, excellent. So we're going to just move through a few slides here. I'll start off with this one here. So there's just this grey box on the right-hand side. Selwyn, is there any way of getting rid of that? Yeah, there.
Is that better?
Covering up half. No, it's sort of, oh, that bit of it's gone, and there's still a bit on the right-hand side, which is covering up part of the map.
Oh, okay.
But I could work with it.
Yeah,
I'll start off anyway. So I'm just going to go.
There you go.
There's quite a large amount of grey. Oh, there we go. Much better. Okay, cool. It's being difficult, and it's not letting me control. There was that little those icons down on the right hand side. That was another option of me being able to control the screen that we tried yesterday. They don't seem to,
that was just to start the presentation. We're in the presentation now, so you should be able to use it.
It's not letting me actually. It was before, but it's not letting me now.
Try sharing it with you again.
Yeah, I don't think I'm being shared. Here we go. I think we might be good now. No, it's still not letting me. It says you can control. Okay.
Do you want to just tell me when to change slides? I'll change it for you, Ed.
Yeah, annoyingly, it just doesn't seem to be. Apologies. Okay, so if we could change the slide now, please. Yeah, so, right, we're looking at, well, clearly New Zealand. So just thought I'd give you a quick overview of the lay of the land in New Zealand. So pretty much all of the wine regions are on the east coast. The main reason for that is that there's a range of hills which run all the way down New Zealand. There's the Northern Alps, which run through the top of the North Island, and then the Southern Alps that run all the way down the South Island. And so, yeah, they have a huge influence on the rainfall. So what you find on the west coast is it's very green, but very wet. It gets very high rainfall, so not really suitable for viticulture there at all. Whereas on the east coast, it's in the rain shadow. And so all of the growing regions, with the exception of Central Otago, which is sort of right in the middle of the South Island at the very bottom, all of the other regions are, as I say, on the along the coast. So starting up here, you've got an area here, Waiheke Island. It's a small island off Auckland. You've got the Auckland region itself, Kumu, and then another region here, Matakano. Now, yeah, up here, obviously we're in the southern hemisphere, so the further north we go, the hotter it gets. So up here tends to make, you know, there's quite a lot of Syrah grown on Waiheke Island. There's some very good Chardonnay and redboard overietals predominantly. Then as you head down the coast here, get the Gisborne area here is quite well known for Chardonnay. Hawke's Bay, which has an area called the Gimlet Gravels, which is like a designated growing zone on an old river terrace. They're sort of, yeah, again in those sort of fuller bodied wine styles. So redboard overietals predominantly, but certainly some very good Syrah grown there also, and some Chardonnay. I should probably mention that even though we're sort of warmer up here in the North Island, really the whole of New Zealand would be considered a cool climate viticulturally. You know, when you compare it to some of the other, you know, warmer areas, Australia, Spain, even parts of Italy. So when I'm saying it's warmer, they're still kind of cooler climate examples of some of these warmer climate varieties. You come down here to the Wairarapa, which is also has made of the sub-region, and that's Martinborough. Is probably the best known sub-region of the Wairarapa. And this is about as far north as good quality Pinot Noir is grown. You know, it's getting sort of cool enough in the evenings here and warm enough in the daytime that the fruit can ripen. But yeah, still the growing season's long enough that the grapes can hang on the vine for a prolonged period of time, enough to develop some good flavors and still retain the acidity. So pretty much from here south is really where we're coming into Pinot Noir country. So we jump across the Cook Strait here, and we've got Nelson at the top there. The best known winery there is a winery called Neudorf. They produce some very good Chardonnay. And then of course we've got Marlborough. Now Marlborough is by far the largest, as I'm sure you'll all know, the largest region in New Zealand in terms of its output. And Marlborough, I think around about 85% of Marlborough's production is Sauvignon Blanc. But certainly some good quality Pinot Noirs come out of Marlborough these days. Some very good Chardonnays as well. Very, very dry region there. Then as we go further south, we're into the Canterbury, North Canterbury region, this big purple area. And then within the North Canterbury region, there's the Waipara Valley, you can see, which is just a small valley. So the North Canterbury region specialises in Riesling, Pinot Noir, and also Chardonnay in particular. As we go further south, we'll jump right down to the bottom here to Central Otago. So Central Otago is, as I say, it's the only region that's not really heavily influenced by the maritime climate. It's right in the centre there. And even though it's at the bottom of the South Island, so in theory it should be the coolest region, it's actually, we actually harvest about 2 weeks later than Central Otago, and we get bud burst at around the same time, if not earlier. So they actually have a shorter growing season in Central Otago, just because of where it's located. It's not influenced by the ocean, and so they do get quite high spikes of temperatures through the growing season there. So we'll just move on to the next slide, which has just a close-up of here we go. So this is just a little bit about North Canterbury. So we're obviously on the east coast. We're halfway between around about halfway between Marlborough and Central Otago. We're very much a cool climate, growing region, and that long hang time I was mentioning, the difference between Central Otago, Waipara or North Canterbury has the longest growing season in New Zealand. So we tend to, between bud burst and when we harvest the fruit, we're usually at least a week later than other varieties, other regions, and sometimes quite a few weeks later. So even Marlborough, we typically start picking a week later than Marlborough, which really suits the wine styles that we're aiming to make, those cool climate varietals. And having that longer hang time tends to build up, really good flavour development rather than it being sort of condensed to a shorter season. And yeah, other thing is really ultra low cropping. We tend to, over our flowering period, we often get quite unsettled weather, which is a little bit like Martinborough region as well. We have similar weather patterns to Martinborough, and Martinborough is also known for very small crops because of that weather over flowering. And so in North Canterbury, much like Martinborough, we don't have a lot of big corporations like you do in sort of Marlborough and some other regions. We don't have a lot of big multinational sort of companies because, as I say, the crop levels are much lower. So most of the wineries, virtually all are small sort of family-owned producers. We'll just pop through to the next slide there. Thanks, Selwyn. This is just, you probably won't be able to read it that well, but this is just to show you some of the sort of the diversity that we have sort of within the region in terms of soils. We have, from what I understand, the most diverse range of different soils within a single region where we are. You've got what's called the Waikari limestone, you've got Omahi limestone, you've got Opawan clay loam, and then you've got what's called the Glasnevin gravels, which is what Pegasus Bay is planted on, and that's just where the riverbeds sort of carved its way through the valley over hundreds of thousands of years, and just all of the stones from the mountains, from the main divide, have been washed down, and it's, as I say, where the river's sort of changed its path over time. So it's left a lot of this very smooth grey river stone, very, very free draining soils. Then you've got the Pahu loam, clay loam. You've got some silt loam, and what's called the Mayfield silt loam. So quite a lot of these areas are quite small, but you're getting a lot of variation of soil within, as I say, within this very sort of small region. We'll flip to the next slide there, thanks. Selwyn. There we go. So that's just a Google map shot there, just to show you with a reasonably far out zoom. So you can see on the left, you've got the main divide, or the Southern Alps, which is a really important geographical feature because of the rain shadow I was mentioning, and that mountain range runs all the way down the South Island from the very top to the very bottom, and it's quite a significant sort of backdrop to where we are. And then to the east there on the right, you've got the Pegasus Bay ocean, or actually going down to the ocean itself, down to the rear, right there, that's Pegasus Bay itself. So we're just over the hills, just where Selwyn was before, with the pointer just over there. That's where the winery is, and we're just tucked in under this range of hills here, which divides us from the coast. That range is called the Teviotdale Range, and that gives us really good shelter from the easterly, from those sea breezes. And then just a little bit further inland, you can see the Main Divide logo there. That's actually, we've planted our own vineyard, Main Divide Vineyard. And the Main Divide Vineyard was planted about 10 years ago on a very similar soil. It's on the Glasnevin gravels as well, a little bit further inland towards the Main Divide. So we're growing about half the Main Divide fruit ourselves these days. We'll just jump to the next slide, please. So this is just zooming in a little bit more to the Pegasus Bay site. You can see the riverbed that borders two sides of the vineyard. So it sort of comes in from the mountains, and then it does a bit of a curve, and then follows down round and then out to sea, out to the coast. As you can see here, we've got 3 different blocks, and we're looking down, you can see a number of terraces that have been cut through where the riverbeds forged its path over time. So you can see lots of sort of contours in the soil. So yeah, there's our 3 vineyards are on, there's quite a few different levels and terraces that run through our vineyard site. So at the bottom there's the airstrip block. The airstrip block is actually just down here. There is that's mainly aromatic wines. Those little white tea things there are wind machines. So they're for frost protection. And then the middle block there, the terrace block, as you can see, there's a terrace that runs all the way through it, and that terrace block was our original planting. So we planted those back in 1985. Was myself and my 3 brothers when I was 10 years old, and this block was just planted from cuttings. Yeah, they're ungrafted vines, ungrafted 35-year-old vines, and have quite a mix of different varietals there. And then at the top there's the river block. So obviously right on the edge of the riverbed there, up elevated above the river. Yeah, that's a lot of the new clones of Pinot Noir that we planted about 25 years ago. So it has a number of other varieties too, but yeah, a lot of different Pinot Noir clones. So we'll jump to the next slide there. And we'll just have a quick look at the vineyards themselves. So this is the airstrip block. So obviously the different colours just represent different, either different varieties or different clones of the same variety. So this is predominantly Riesling, and we've got a number of different clones of Riesling there. There's also a little bit of Muscat and some Semillon in that block as well. As you can see, we've got we keep all the clones individually. Sometimes there's just a few rows of each clone, and you'll see that even more as we go through to the different blocks. So we'll flick through to the next. So this is the terrace block. This was our original plantings. As I say, this was all planted from cuttings. There's a clone called 10 bar 5, which is the second clone in from on the right hand side there. That was what most of New Zealand was planted with back in the 80s. It was the clone that was available. But since then, we've planted a lot of other clones. But we still, when we make our Prima Donna, which is our sort of top label of Pinot Noir that we just make in top years, the core of the wine typically comes from this block here, or this particular clone. As you can see here, we've got Chardonnay. Yep, there's another clone there, 10 bar 5. We've got Sauvignon, which is where our Sauvignon Semillon blend comes from, the Semillon next door to it. And then we've got some red Bordeaux varietals, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc there, and then clone 5, Pinot Noir there as well. So we'll just jump to the next slide there. There we go. So this is at the time, this was the biggest rootstock trial that was happening in New Zealand at the time, about 25 years ago. So we looked at a whole lot of different rootstocks and what was going to be best suited to our vineyard site with various different clones. So this is when we really came, a lot of new clones became available to us, so you can see there's a real mix of the different clones, from a bunch of the different Dijon clones, clone 5, the Abel clone, some Mendoza Chardonnay there, and also some Merlot and some Malbec too. So we'll flick on to the next slide. Thanks. So yeah, this is a vineyard where, like most of New Zealand now, accredited members of New Zealand's Sustainable Viticulture Program. So that's a program that was set up by the New Zealand wine growers quite a number of years ago, just to move the whole industry towards being sustainable. And I believe we're the only country in the world that has a sustainable program that pretty much is industry-wide. To export your wine from New Zealand, you have to be part of this program. The vineyard, whole vineyard here is 40 hectares, and I was planted in 1985 with myself and my 3 brothers and mum and dad. As I say, I've already mentioned that uncrafted. Round about 1/3 Pinot Noir, about 1/3 Riesling. With the Pinot Noir, we've got about a dozen different clones of Pinot Noir. With the Riesling, there's 3 different clones there. And then the other 1/3 of the vineyard is all of the other varieties that we produce. We'll jump to the next slide. Thank you. So, so located close to that Teviotdale range of hills, I just touched on that earlier. This is one of the most sort of important geographical features of North Canterbury, and particularly of the Waipara Valley. So on the other side of those hills is the coast itself, and most of Canterbury is exposed to a wind called the easterly, which is, we name it locally as the beasterly easterly. And it comes off the Pacific Ocean. You can have a beautiful sunny day, but it just comes off the Pacific Ocean. You get this very cold, cool breeze. And my father actually planted the first vineyard in Canterbury 10 years before, planting the Pegasus Bay vineyard, and he planted on the Canterbury Plains. And it was the reason that he really wanted to look for a site that was just a little bit warmer, just for ripening more consistently in those cooler vintages. And that's why about 90% of the vineyards in North Canterbury are here in the Waipara Valley, and that's that's basically why we chose the site there. So frosts, so frosts are basically our number one threat. So we have wind machines that are that are right around the vineyard. We are very much on the edge viticulturally. So, we're not a warm region that's just warm or hotter, where we do get a lot of fluctuation in temperatures, and we do get a lot of variation between the vintages as well. And we really like that. We sort of embrace each vintage, and we handle the fruit differently depending obviously on those quite big differences between the vintages. But we are very prone to, as I say, to frost. So in spring, we monitor the frost very, very closely. We'll flick to the next slide there. And again, that's just the entranceway to the winery. So yeah, mum and dad there. So I mentioned earlier, dad planted the first grapes in 1975. Actually, it was coincidentally the year I was born. So I think I might have driven my father to drink maybe, or to plant a vineyard anyway. So then, yeah, 10 years later, Pegasus Bay was planted in 1985. Dad was actually a neurologist, consultant neurologist. He was an associate professor of neurology, and that was his main profession. So wine was really just a hobby for him, even all the way through setting up Pegasus Bay. Dad had a medical practice, his own private practice, and was full-time at the hospital as well. So my mother was very instrumental in sort of being involved in setting the winery up. And you obviously have 4 sons working for the business, and actually 2 spouses now as well. We'll flick on to the next slide there. Thank you. Rest of the family. So Ivan oversees, so my father oversees the viticulture now, which he's been doing from the start really. So we have our own viticulturalist, Greg, but Dad oversees those, oversees Greg. My mum's Chris, responsible for all of the gardens and the grounds. My oldest brother Matt's the head winemaker. He's got a small team of 3 that work with him. I take care of the marketing, and my brother younger brother Paul's the general manager. And then my older brother Mike, everyone thinks he's younger, but he's, my comeback is that he hasn't worked for the family business for so long and he doesn't have children. But anyway, he's the local sales manager in Christchurch. So he takes care of, we do our direct sales into Christchurch. And then my wife now that we don't have the restaurant, we've changed to an events venue. She's basically taking care of all of that. So we'll roll through to the next slide. And again. So yeah, wine styles, really something that was really important to Dad when we planted the vineyard. Obviously, we wanted to make wines that really reflect where they're made. I'd say in the early days, we used to look at the old world. We drank a lot of old world wines ourselves. We had a lot of wines from all over the place, but I think we were really influenced by sort of those old world styles. And I think originally Matt was sort of almost trying to sort of mimic, what was happening in, the wines that he really admired in the old world. And I think over time, over the years, we've sort of gained a lot more of confidence as we've seen the wines age, as we've, had more just experience with getting to understand the vineyard and a lot of experimentation. And I think for quite some time now, we've sort of moved away from trying to sort of copy what's happening on the old world and really try and make the wine styles that we think really suit our particular site. We're not Burgundy, we're Whiteburn, North Canterbury. We're not the Mosel, we're Whiteburn, North Canterbury. So we've changed the way that we've handled the fruit and how we make the wines a lot over the years. Wines with sort of texture and length is something that my dad has talked about right from day one, and that's something that hopefully you'll get in our wines. A good example of that will be the Sauvignon Semillon, where we're using lees aging and barrel ferment and different things to really fill out the mid palate of that wine that can often be a bit lacking in Sauvignon Blanc. But I think that really follows through with all of the wines. And sort of complexity and longevity. So we wanted to make wines that will go somewhere in the bottle. We do age the wines for a minimum of 1 year in bottle before release. We got sick of the wines just starting to drink well when they sold out. And so about 10 years ago, we sort of, took the move to holding wines back a bit longer. And we've now got to a point where we can hold them for a minimum of a year in bottle. The reserves that you see there in the picture, we aim for 2 years if we can. Let's move to the next slide. So we're one of the founding members of the Family of 12. So the Family of 12 is a group of 12 family-owned wineries that basically have formed a small group to sort of share information together. We share information about what we do in the vineyards, the winery. We get our viticulturists together twice a year, and we have certain we have just basically workshops on different topics, and we also do some joint marketing initiatives as well. And we're all basically early pioneers of our region, early pioneers of sort of, I guess, fine wine in the various regions. So we'll just flick to the next slide. Just give a quick look at. So my brother Paul there is the current chairman. He's actually just about to hand it over, but he's been the chairman for the last 2 years. And none of the other wineries there, so all very reputable, well-known brands from New Zealand: Cumi River, Villa Maria, Milton, Craigie Range, Atarangi, Palliser, Neudolf, Nautilus, from Lawson Dry Hills, ourselves, and Felton Road. So we're in very good company there. And we'll flick again to the next one. And we'll flick again because this was our restaurant, we're just about to roll out our new events venue shortly, the next couple of weeks, our events offering. Main Divide. So Main Divide was, traditionally it was fruit that was just sourced from growers in North Canterbury that we worked very closely with. Most of the growers we've had quite long-term relationships with. I don't know if you can go back there to the, oh, there we go. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we've planted our own vineyard 10 years ago, or 12 years ago actually, for Main Divide, that was just to have a bit more control over the fruit. We still are working with some growers. We've got about half a dozen growers that we're working with very closely. But as I say, we've got quite a lot of the fruit now. We're growing ourselves under the same management as Pegasus Bay Vineyard Management. So with Main Divide wines, we're sort of, it sounds like a cheesy thing to say, but we're really aiming to sort of over-deliver on the quality of these wines. We're not trying to make just very simple, fruity, typical kind of second label, cheap and cheerful wines. We're aiming to make, still really high quality wines that express where they're from. And, we sort of put the same amount of kind of love into what we do with them in the winery. Typically, if it's a wine that's aged in barrels, we might use, older barrels, not as much new oak. But certainly the fruit source is very good. And hopefully, the wines are, stand up very well for, for what you pay for, for the money, bang for buck. So I think that might be it for the slide. If you just one more slide, that's the Main Divide there, or the foothills of the Main Divide. Mountains get much higher behind there. It's going up through an area at Arthur's Pass. And we'll just flick on again. Flick on again. We saw that earlier. Yep, I think we're done.
Great.
All right. So hopefully hopefully we learned something there. We're going to just touch on a couple of wines. What we're going to do is just try 3 brackets of wines. So we'll look at the put this down here so you can see we're going to look at the Main Divide and then the Pegasus Bay equivalent. So this is Main Divide Sauvignon Blanc. So the Sauvignon Blanc comes from our Main Divide vineyard, and really the aim with this wine was to make something that was, quite classic sort of Kiwi Sauvignon Blanc. So something that had a lot of fruit. It doesn't have a lot of an oak component to the wine. It's all stainless steel fermented. With this wine, we actually do inoculate as well. So we add a cultured yeast just so that the Pegasus Bay Sauvignon Semillon has a slightly sort of funky component to it, which is partly to do with the natural fermentation. But for Main Divide, we're aiming for much cleaner, more pure flavors. We do age the wine on lees just for a short time. So we do about 4 months of this wine on lees, which is perhaps less common for Sauvignon Blanc in New Zealand. Typically, people are sort of fermenting the wines and then bottling them and they're out on the market straight away. We, as I say, we tend to age them for around about 4 months on lees just to give the wine a bit of texture. And we pick it a little bit riper than some producers. They're perhaps not quite as much of that super grassy herbaceousness. We are using UCD Davis clone. Yep, exactly. Just had a question there from Darcy. Then it's bottled. It's bottled, unfined, and unfiltered. We sell it to you guys. I'll just move on to. This is the Pegasus Bay Sauvignon Semillon. So with this wine, As I was saying earlier, it's a kind of like a good example of what my father was wanting to do with Sauvignon Blanc in terms of texture. So right from our first vintage, we went off on quite a different direction with Sauvignon Blanc under the Pegasus Bay label. A lot of people thought we were crazy, and you know, a lot of people said to Dad, you know, we totally understand. You know, I mean, Dad wanted to blend Semillon with Sauvignon Blanc, which is of course what they do traditionally in Bordeaux. To make a more structured wine with more kind of texture and something that would age. But a lot of people said, no, look, the market wants straight Sauvignon Blanc, and people might not, you know, understand it's a blended white. They might think that it's, you know, just a blend of the dregs or something along those lines. But Dad was really, you know, wanted to, he was sort of true to really wanting to make those more textural styles and something that would be more versatile with food. And so we went off on our own direction, and made, I guess, a style of Sauvignon Blanc that we really believe in. And you know, it's become actually for us a really important wine for export. And it's yeah, I think people see it as a real point of difference. You know, there's so many straight Sauvignon Blancs in particular from, you know, from Marlborough. So it's just I guess it sort of, you know, gives it a point of difference, sets it apart from what a lot of people are doing with Sauvignon. So the blend is 70% Sauvignon, which we tank ferment. So that's fermented in stainless steel tanks. We do, it's all a natural fermentation, so we don't inoculate this wine. And then it's aged on the yeast lees for around about 10 months. The other thing we're starting to do with this component is some skin contact, which is something my brother's Matt's been playing around with for the last few years. So the 2018 vintage, which is the next release, will start to show a bit of that character. And the aim there was just to add a bit of a phenolic component to the wine, add a bit more texture and a bit more grip, and kind of set it apart even further from, you know, from the classic, you know, classic sort of Kiwi style of Sauvignon Blanc. The Semillon component's barrel fermented and it's barrel aged, and it's aged for around about the same time, so 10 months, just in old French oak barrels. Then the two components are tasted and assessed, and then blended, and then bottled. And then with this one, we age it and bottle for a minimum of a year, and bottle before release as well, which is something a bit different. It's something good to know about this wine. You might see an older vintage of this wine in the market, 2016, 2015. I mean, these wines will keep improving and drinking really well and just developing positively for, like, we've got, you know, at least 10 to 15 years. Our 2003 vintage is the vintage at the moment that we tend to pull out and show trade and wine writers that are coming through the winery at the moment that we think is drinking really well. So yeah, don't think, you know, you've got a 2013 vintage in the market or whatever it might be, that the wine will be past it. They will live for many years, and that has a lot to do with the Semillon component of the wine. So we will look at the Riesling. So Riesling is, as we've sort of mentioned earlier, a really important variety for our vineyard and for our region. I was saying earlier about sort of mimicking old world styles. Well, you know, we used to really, Matt used to really look up to the Mosel, and we do drink a lot of those wines still, and love them. But you know, Matt sort of modelled this wine originally on a sort of a Mosel sort of Cabernet style. And you know, the grapes used to be picked earlier and the fermentation was stopped earlier, so they were quite sort of sweeter, lighter wines. But over the years, we've discovered that the longer we hang the fruit out, the more of this really intense, orange zesty, sort of spicy character that we get, which is a really distinctive and unique regional character for North Canterbury. And so we've started to hang the fruit out over the last 10 years quite a lot longer, and we're picking a lot riper than what we used to. And in most cases, there's some degree of botrytis, even in like the drier styles that we make. But we're actually fermenting drier than what we used to as well. So the wines these days, our Riesling styles, are much kind of richer, fuller styles than they used to be. As I say, they used to be a lot sort of lighter and more delicate. And we think this style has actually become more of a personal preference to us as well. Those a slightly richer, fuller style of Riesling, and being a little bit drier as well, but also a style that we think suits our our region, best. That's the main divide version. This is one of 5 different Rieslings that we make, and this is the earliest picked of the Riesling styles that we make. It's still not early picked. It's still picked later than what a lot of people do in the valley, but it's the earliest of the 5 styles that we make. And yeah, onto the Pegasus Bay Riesling. So this is all from our home vineyard, and this is but the main difference with this is just that it's picked later than the main divide. So it comes from older vines as well, and it comes in riper. So with both of these wines, the fruit comes in, they're pressed off, clear juice is fermented in stainless steel, quite cool temperatures. And then we stop the fermentation where we think the balance is just perfect between the alcohol, the fruit weight, the residual sweetness, and the acidity. And so we're really looking at just all those things coming into balance. And so obviously the degree of residual sweetness changes every year depending on on what the natural acidity is and what the fruit concentration, fruit weight is like. And so it's also a style that you could age very, very comfortably for 20 years. The style will age for, will age for decades. You will also get a little bit of spritz in these wines. So we try and retain as much of the natural dissolved CO2 as possible in these wines. So there will be just a little bit of a spritz, which is a natural from the fermentation. We just move it very slowly to the bottling line just to retain that little bit of spritz, which we think just really accentuates the freshness in the wine. So we make another 3 Riesling styles, but being aware of time, etc., we'll just stick with that. And then we've got 2 Pinots. So this is the main divide Pinot Noir, 2016. And this also comes from our main divide vineyard now. So this is made from a clone called the Abel clone, and it also has some clone 5, or what they call UCD 5. So yeah, 12-year-old vines, and kind of made in like a mini Pegasus Bay style. So it has very similar treatment to Pegasus Bay. Obviously it's a different fruit source. One of the main things that we have been experimenting with over the years is whole bunch. One of the main things in the recent years. So we do small batches with everything from nothing to 100% whole bunch to experiment. We're sitting on around 1/3 whole bunch these days. 1/3's kind of what we think works with our vineyard site. So my brother Matt's been on a bit of a mission with our Pinot Noirs to make them a bit less tannic and a bit more refined, a bit more vibrant, showing a bit more of those red fruit characters, because our vineyard does give us quite big tannins. They're small berries with relatively thick skin, that's probably partly to do with the fact that those vines are ungrafted, and partly a regional thing. But we do get quite sort of savoury, spicy characters in our wines. And they do tend to be at that fuller-bodied end of the spectrum for Pinot Noir. But being Pinot Noir, we don't want them to be too heavy or too chunky. So Matt's been really working on the tannin, the way we extract the tannin, and just making sure the wines are really vibrant. So with the introduction of whole bunch, we've been doing less time on the skins after fermentation. So we're getting a less of those firmer seed tannins. And so the wines are, a little bit softer and more silky and a little bit finer, but still have that sort of, some quite savoury kind of edge, which is, as I say, quite a signature North Canterbury character. Not unlike Martinborough. I was talking about Martinborough as a region with the weather patterns, and we have quite similar soils in our Glasnevin gravels to what they call the Martinborough terraces, and are those free-draining river gravels. And then finally, the Pegasus Bay Pinot Noir. So this is a really important wine in the range, and this comes from obviously all from our home vineyard. And with the Pegasus Pinot, it's made from a lot of different components of Pinot Noir. So we have about a dozen different clones of Pinot Noir, as I mentioned earlier, planted in the vineyard. And each of those components, each of those clones are harvested individually, and then we taste or they're fermented individually. Some we might have the same clones with different amounts of skin contact or different amounts of whole bunch, different, and they might be aged in French oak, different brands of barrels or aged barrels. So we end up with a lot of different components of Pinot Noir that go into the final blend. And as I say, the vine age ranging between 25 and 35-year-old vines. So we actually have some of the oldest Pinot Noir vines in the country. I think 38 years old are the oldest ones, which actually are a vineyard called Kaituna Valley here in Canterbury. Yeah, our 35 years are our oldest vines, which represent just over half of our Pinot Noir plantings. So starting to get some pretty good vine age on there too. This has a bit longer in barrels. So with the Pegasus Pinot, we age for between 18 and 22 months in barrel, just depending on the vintage. And that we used to be just a year in barrel, but we moved to that longer time, not to give the wine more oak, but just for softening of the tannins. And then again, the wine gets another year in bottle before release. So that's your virtual tasting. We make a pretty huge range, so I think altogether we make around 30 different wines. So we just wanted to, just concentrate on a few of those key wines at the moment. So I don't know if we've got any questions at the moment, or whether we just jump straight into. I made a little just a video with my phone. It's very amateur and it sort of chops in and out all over the place. Didn't bother trying to make it too slick. So yeah, just doing a bit of a virtual tour of the.
I actually wanted to say something. By the way, Wine Enthusiast has asked for a bottle of your 15 Riesling, and they're going to be doing a photo shoot on it. So I think there's something good coming up.
That's awesome. That's the Pegasus Bay Riesling, is it?
Yep.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Oh, that's great news.
Usually when that happens, it means that good things are happening. They're about to happen. September. That's the September issue that's going to be coming out.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Tara. Fingers crossed for something good.
Awesome. That's very exciting news. Okay. So I think Joel earlier had a question about what are the lowest temperatures that your wind machines would be used at?
So we tend to turn them on. They're all automated. So back in the old days, we used to use helicopters, and we used to have to stay up all night with a temperature probe out our car window, driving around the vineyard with a flashlight, directing the chopper to the coldest part of the vineyard. Nowadays, for the most part, we can lie in bed looking at our iPhone, so we've got a really good sophisticated frost fighting system now, where we can see everything on the phone and look at all the temperatures and the wind direction, wind speed, and everything like that. And so we have them turning on, the wind machines turning on usually at 0.5 degrees. So at 0.5 degrees, they turn on, and they tend to raise the temperature by about 2 degrees. When we start getting down to about -1.5, that's when frost damage really starts to occur. And so at that point, we've actually got frost pots that we put around every wind machine. We've got 20 frost pots around every wind machine, and we've got altogether there is 9 wind machines. So unfortunately, there's no way of lighting those frost pots from bed with the iPhone. So yeah, when we light those, it's a big night. We have to get up, and it's an all-nighter for us. We have to go and light every frost pot around the vineyard, but they will raise the temperature usually by another 2 degrees. That warm air just blows up. It goes up, and then the wind machine just disperses that warm air around that particular part of the vineyard. So we have the ability to raise the temperature by about 4.5 degrees if we throw everything at it. And we also have water in the coolest part of the vineyard. So we've got two water over just the coolest part of the vineyard. So that water sprays on the vines, and you think when you look at it, it looks like it's you'd think that's all been frosted, because you actually see the ice, the leaves have frozen. They've got ice all around them, but it actually creates heat to freeze water. Energy is created when the water's frozen, and it just encapsulates the inside of the leaf with a slightly warmer environment. And so if you just keep the water on it as the daylight comes, then eventually that'll save that part of the vineyard as well.
Great. Okay. unless there's any other questions, I'll put on the video.
I'm sorry, Ed. What did you mention before the main clone for the main divide Pinot Noir, or how many? I'm sure there's a number of clones, but what would be the main clone for the?
So the main clone for the main divide Pinot Noir is in most vintages, when it comes from our main divide vineyard, is a clone called the Abel clone. And the Abel clone is otherwise known as the Gumboot clone in New Zealand. It's a clone that was famously someone who planted the Atarangi vineyard back in the, I'm not sure exactly when, it was quite a while ago. Anyway, the story goes that somebody took a cutting from one of the DRC vineyards in Burgundy and smuggled it into the country in his gumboot. And they affectionately became known as the Gumboot clone.
And then just one more. You mentioned the frizzante, or the slight sparkle from the Riesling. Could you go over that one more time, please?
Sure. So it's what we would refer to as spritz or spritzing, and it's basically when the wine's fermenting. When all wine's fermenting, it's giving off CO2 as a byproduct. Usually when that wine, most people, when they bottle their wine, that just gets knocked out of the wine as it goes to the bottling line naturally. But we move it we bottle very soon after the fermentation, and we move it very slowly to the bottling line, and at very cool temperatures. And what we're aiming to do is retain as much of that natural, it's called dissolved CO2, as possible. So I think it's really important for people not to think that we're carbonating the wine or adding anything. It's the natural byproduct of the fermentation, and we do that just to, as I say, just to accentuate the freshness and give the wine another sort of dimension on the palate. Yeah, the cooler the wine is, the less that shows. The warmer the wine is, the warmer the wine is, the more that shows. So if it is a character that people don't enjoy for whatever reason, they could just chill the wine down a little bit more. I saw a question just come through there about the 2020 vintage. 2020 vintage, yeah, was absolutely fantastic. One of those vintages that pretty much all over the country, everyone had a good vintage in 2020. Usually someone gets, hail or frost or rain at harvest, but 2020, from what I understand, just right across the country, was a great vintage, and certainly no exception for us in North Canterbury. So really quite a warm summer, but very, very dry autumn, so no pressure to pick. So all the fruit came in beautiful condition. It was a little bit challenging with all of the restrictions around operating the winery as an essential service because of obviously what was going on with COVID. But yeah, certainly be some excellent wines coming from 2020.